Uh, yeah. Uh, yeah. Uh.
Okay, we're live once again for Saturday Night 5 on a Saturday night, oddly enough. Please make sure that you subscribe, rate, and review if you're on the Going for Two podcast feed. And if you're watching us here on YouTube, either live or later on, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel and click the little bell, get the notifications, and maybe even give us a thumbs up on the video. I'm Brian Ford. And I'm here with a guest co-host tonight, Kyle Senra. Kyle, how you doing?
Hey, Brian, and hey, everyone who's watching, listening. I'm part of the Going for Two Live network as well. I host a couple shows, and glad that Brian had the invitation open to come on talk some Dynasty here on the Saturday Night 5, even though there's just two of us.
Yeah, and you kind of beat me to it. I was gonna tell you, let's if for folks who may not be familiar, where can they find you and your stuff and all your work, whether they're going for two or not?
So speaking Dynasty, I co-host the Dynasty Gambit. We go on Thursday nights, and in season that kind of functions as a Thursday night pregame show. But yeah, we can be a little looser with time now. There's not any Thursday night games. Typically, will be 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, right now every Thursday. I guess we're coming up on the off-season programming after the Super Bowl, and then we'll flip to every 2 Thursdays. So I guess we have 1 week left of the every week on February 9th, and then we'll flip to every 2 weeks. After that, it'll be February 23rd, and then alternating weeks there. At the same time, I also have the press coverage show, which will be starting up on February 20th, and those will be Mondays, and again every second Monday, which I believe will be lineup. It'll be the same weeks. So if you don't want to see me, you can go to the alternate weeks, and you can avoid me completely on the Going for Two live feed unless I pop up on a guest show somewhere, because again, people are gracious enough to want to invite me and have me talk along. And again, if you see on the screen, but for anyone listening, on Twitter at Senra Says, if you do want to follow me on my other content with full press coverage as well. I've got a couple of podcasts there, talking fantasy a lot, Packers pod as well, because I'm a Packers fan. But yeah, a lot of fantasy football talk for me.
Right on. And so I was really glad that you were able to come on. I was able to pop on the Gambit a couple episodes ago, and we had a good time. And I thought, a good topic for this time of year to kind of give us a bit of a break from 3-4 months of bickering about rookies would be to kind of see where we're at with rankings. It's a little bit frozen in time ish, right? Because the point scoring season is over. We haven't had the free agency bedlam yet, right? So we kind of have a bit of stasis, if you will, where our rankings don't fluctuate too much usually. And it's also, I think, a good sort of temperature check as we move into the eve of free agency, and where we're at with folks, and sometimes how anticipating that free agency, especially with running backs, will affect our rankings. So we're gonna talk about our rankings and some discrepancies therein. But before we do, a couple things. One, just for those of you who are not familiar or forget, it's the Dynasty Saturday Night 5. So we do lists of 5 as sort of the vehicle for talking about the Dynasty topics. There you go. And so we each picked out 5 sort of discrepancies in our rankings that kind of stood out that we wanted to talk about in a friendly, polite-ish kind of way.
Pitchforks.
But before we get into that, I thought it might be good to talk a little bit about sort of what each of our approaches or philosophies might be when it comes to ranks. As the guest, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I guess you mentioned, the temperature also makes it feel really frozen, but you're right. This is like the furthest away we are from scoring points. However, I guess when it comes to rankings, the easiest way I can wrap my head around it, I suppose, or where I most likely will use rankings is in drafts. So I tend to approach my rankings as how would I draft? If I was approaching draft, how would I approach these tiers? And my rankings will kind of reflect tiers. So we'll talk about like, chunks of players together that kind of fit an archetype, and almost rather than one singular player, maybe even disagreeing or this, a discrepancy in that archetype of player. Should they be ranked higher or lower? And we'll talk about that specifically at the wide receiver position, but I think it applies to quite a few positions. So, the balance between building a team to win and building the team to last long term as well. And that kind of, there are times where my tiers are, okay, which tier is first, this one or this one? They almost work parallel in trying to decide, do I just kind of alternate the rankings and fuse the tiers together in the rankings? I tend to not. I tend to usually, okay, if I've identified this tier, I'll put every player in that tier, and then the next one. And I think a lot of the times the discrepancy in tiers will usually be age. These older productive players who are scoring more than these younger players, do I put them first, or do I go with the younger players? And I think a lot of times in drafts, it's I guess kind of where I put those tiers. Sometimes I'll default to maybe the what is a more scarce asset. If there's these players at the very top of the production, but they're older, okay, I'll grab one now because my only chance to get one, thinking I'll get younger players, multiple younger players later. So sometimes that might come across in rankings again. I think maybe most apparent at near the top of the wide receiver position for that. So some general philosophies there is I tend to think it more from a draft and a startup perspective than I do necessarily like trade rankings, because I find that isn't so linear. A lot of times it will be really flat tiers of player values of what a player is worth, where you could have player ranking discrepancy, but you can't really, the value isn't enough where someone will actually pay a plus on the wide receiver 23 to move up to the wide receiver 18.
True. Yeah. Before I get over to mine, let's a few of our folks checking in here. Zach with FF Uncle Piff. One of the tattoo artists that does work on me. His name his handle is Piff Doom. So there you go. Just rang a bell there. Thanks for checking in. Gator J, as per usual, checking in, saying hi. Thanks so much for being here. Our pal Jamie wishing us to have a great show, but can't stay. Watch later. Thank you so much. Kevin, of course.
The Cleveland connoisseur are always busy doing Cleveland things.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for the support.
And telling folks to smash the thumbs up button, of course. All right. So, for me, I in a sense, I'm the same, in that I think about this in a draft, but I also think about it in sort of if I'm investing, like if I'm coming in the door right now into Dynasty and investing, who do I want to have for the next 2 or 3 years, right? And so I think age tends to play a bigger part of my formula, if you will, than perhaps maybe some other folks. I kind of take into account like all sorts of variables like talent and skill, like age, of course, situation, current production, expected production, perceived value, right? That sort of thing. And sort of kind of all that goes in to a big just pot and I start it, And so my tiers tend to not be sort of where you have those archetypes in there. Like, here's my tier of still productive veterans, or here's my tier of, young guys who are on the run. It's like,
if you were to look at my rankings, you could clearly see where the tiers were, whereas yours, you'll mix the archetype of tiers.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And
okay.
While we're saying it, we should probably say, our rankings are up on goingfor2.com, Dynasty rankings. So we're starting to get those up now for the 2023 yearly cycle. Me, Kyle, and Jeff have them up. So you can play along at home if you'd like. But the background tiers that we have on the back end of where we rank players doesn't show up on the website. So we'll refer to the tiers, as best we can as we're going through these things. And so I kind of have gone back and forth in the last couple of years as like correcting for being too ageist, and then maybe I overcorrected, and that sort of thing. And I think lately, especially when it comes to running back, I'm just saying, listen, I'm betting on youth, I'm betting on talent, and I'm betting on who are the guys who are like solidly arrow up. Who are the guys where, like, if I picked the brain of somebody who was like a value only drafter, say, right, who would they rank? I'm like, I kind of have that voice in my head a little bit, because I think that matters. That matters because when you're looking at things like a stock market and the long haul, you have to take that into account, right? You have to take that aggregate into account, right? Obviously, in a trade situation or depending on how a startup is falling, I'm going to deviate from these rankings depending on my team need or something like that. But that's in general sort of how I've been approaching things recently, because I think I kind of was too far in the other way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've listened to Scott Connor a lot over the last couple of years, Charles Chill FFB on Twitter, and he does a lot of great Dynasty content under the Dynasty and Chill moniker and all sorts of other content. And he's talked about recently, is there another way that, like, if you could get somehow like a hype score for a player, for instance, is kind of what he called it, just knowing how much this player is liked by the community. Like, and you add that as a metric to the production and the age and all the other things we look at to create these rankings. Of just kind of what you're talking about, like knowing how people are going to perceive this player through the offseason. And, the closer you get to the season and the points being scored, the less that matters. But especially now in February, that might factor more into rankings. If you could have something like that, a hype score, now would probably be the time, especially before free agency, before the draft. There's, if something bad happens to a player that people don't like, you expect their value to tank. But if something bad happens to a player that they do like, they'll justify it as being okay. So if you could have that hype score, that would just be one added bonus to look analytically as a way to kind of perceive value. And again, especially most important when there is so much unknown.
Yeah, I do try to sprinkle in that perceived value, because after all, I'm not just ranking, like, I mean, first of all, I'm ranking for me. Like, they get published to a website, but it's really convenient to have them for myself. But I'm thinking of these guys not just as players or even fantasy producers, so much as they are for me like a dynasty asset, right? And so that has to get for me folded in to the rankings. At least a little bit, right? Time to pay some bills. Today's show is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Underdog has it all. The industry-leading best ball leagues with huge tournaments, private leagues, and pick'ems. And they're not just football. Scratch that itch during the offseason by playing contests in every major sport. Sign up with promo code GF2. Make a deposit of up to $100, and it will be, well, you can make a deposit however much you want, but Underdog will match that up to $100. Go to Underdog, use the code GF2, get your deposit match of $100, start playing, and maybe even start winning. So, all right, time to roll up the sleeves and do some splaining.
This is a short sleeve shirt, so I didn't really need to.
Dude. You're Canadian, right? I'm in Jersey. I got my cardigan, I got my thermal, I got my t-shirt, got my space heater, as well as my heat. Like I'm not messing around.
Because the heat's on pretty strong here this week and this weekend, so that's why
I'm
can afford to be warm in the house. But it's funny because you're talking about just like the apex of like production and value and all those things. It seems like the one position where there's so much of that at the top of not just age, production, value, likability, the hype, everything is quarterback position, right? If that's what, like, I don't know if that's the first position you wanted to look at, but like,
let's do it.
At the very top, it seems like it's super clear and obvious. Like even you and I were talking about before, we had the same top 13 players, not listed identically in the same ranking order, but like that's a clear cutoff there. I think we both have Trey Lance at QB 13, and I kind of felt the top 12 is pretty clear, and Lance almost kind of falls in a tier of his own. Maybe there's a guy I think might be a little closer to Lance, but it seems like it's kind of a clear cutoff there. Then 14 onward, it gets just to be complete chaos at the quarterback position. So in a single quarterback league, you almost don't want to really be drafting beyond QB 13. At that point, you can kind of almost pick guys off waivers in a single QB league, 12 team, assuming probably would, there'll be viable ways to get points in your lineup a week that you need it for really cheap. But if you can, you want to almost prioritize and exclusively just draft from that top 13. But in Superflex, it feels like it's the same thing. Like you absolutely want to get your QB1 in those first 13. So it's sometimes you might not even just have a choice. Like they'll all be going so early in Superflex drafts that you just kind of take whoever gets to you. And I guess.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I try not to leave a Superflex startup without two of these guys.
Yeah, and I think the if you can trade up even into the get the 2 first-round picks, like I think that maybe something for we're supposed to talk rankings, but that could be a strategy that is really viable where you give up. I've seen a lot of that last year, and people talk about this year. Give up your 2nd and 3rd round pick to get a 1st and then something like a 7th back, still within the range of starters. Technically, however many starters you have. If to start 9, you'd want it to be in the first 9 picks. So it stretches out to start 12, 13. You could stretch that a little bit, but something around 7, 8, 9, I usually find works. And I know one draft I did last year to get Kyler Murray, who I guess it's a good transition because we're going to talk about Kyler Murray's ranking, but had Justin Herbert already and traded up to get the 2nd first-round pick and gave up the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th pick in the startup to get the 1st, I think a 7th and an 8th. And get your 2 elite quarterbacks, and then in that case not drafting again until the 5th round. But even the 2-3 trade, and you take your 2 elite quarterbacks, you might be able to get a 4th round pick. That I think that's certainly viable in Superflex. I don't think it's too much to give up, giving both a 3rd and a 2nd and 3rd round pick in a startup. I think the key is just to make sure you're always getting the extra startup pick back. Never do the unbalanced. Like if you're going to give 2, 3, 4, okay, get that 1, but then get the 7 and the 8 or the 7 and the 10. Like make sure to always get that 2nd or a future rookie pick thrown in always, and don't necessarily also like I wouldn't want to go through my future rookie picks to trade up to get the extra 1st. I'd rather trade within the startup, still maintaining the number of startup picks. And a lot of that strategy does again come from Scott Connor. I'll call him out a couple times. I listen to him a lot, but he preaches that a lot. But I've noticed that kind of works if you want to get those 2 elite quarterbacks and then build the rest of the team around just having those 2, and you don't really have to invest at the rest of the quarterback position too heavily. You can fill your depth really cheaply, and everything in the middle rounds is focused on the other 3 positions.
Yeah. All right. So what's the so speaking of Kyler, what's the one that you wanted to point out at quarterback?
So I just found this more funny and interesting, but I think it does actually make an interesting debate because maybe the top 8 quarterbacks is pretty clear. Like I'd expect in a startup, it's going to be the first 5 are almost automatic. Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, Burrow, Herbert. Like those are probably going to be the first 5 off the board. And then even Trevor Lawrence, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, all the hype they've gained. Like that's probably your first 8 picks in the startup, unless a Justin Jefferson or a Chase, or if it's heavy enough tight end premium, I could see a Kyle Pitts still going in the first round with that hype, even though my rankings don't say so. But I like being the black sheep on Kyle Pitts. That's fine. Kyle Senra, not so big on Kyle Pitts, but once it gets to like QB9, that could be a real interesting pivot point where people can go in a lot of different spots. So you have Kyler at QB9. I have Deshaun Watson actually at QB9, but I found it funny that you have Watson at 12 and I have Murray at 12. So I was interested to hear your argument as once you get to that like end of the first round in the startup, that pivot point where you could feasibly go with the wide receivers. If the rookie picks are there, maybe the rookie 101 and take your shot at Bijan, and you'd plant your flag, it seems like, on Kyler Murray there as the quarterback pick if you're going to be picking late in the first.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think, he's got a couple of years of youth. He's younger. I think it might even be 2 years.
I think it was 2 draft classes. I don't know if they were the same age coming out.
Yeah. And so we're also looking at, I think, not that Watson isn't athletic and mobile, but when it comes to cheat code, we're talking about Kyler sort of getting the edge there. I think when I look at, I had Watson around 12, and I said, listen, I am more than willing to push him up into that tier where I have 6 through 9, right? And if he shows that he can still play football. And he didn't look very good coming back. Now, that doesn't mean that I think he's never going to get up there. But like he didn't, I said, you know what, prove it to me. He didn't prove it to me. So he remains there. So it's more so, I think Watson didn't do enough to show me he's the old Watson than it is, uh, a strong vote of confidence for Kyler over him. At the same time, I think, people are really underestimating. There's a chance that Kyler is liberated from Kingsbury now, and it's a good time to get him. Plus, he's cheap, right? Like I've gotten him at like 111, 112 in startups and startup mocks. Like you're not gonna get him that cheap ever again. Yes, there's the injury, and that's kind of why you're getting the discount. But he's young enough, and the injuries aren't what they used to be with all the science and the rehab and all that. So he's gonna come back mid 23-ish, something like that. Probably be back to his old self with the running at the beginning of 2024. So now you have to bake that timeline in to when you're picking him at 111 and 112, right? And that's going to maybe dictate what you do with the next quarterback or that sort of thing. But yeah, no, I would definitely prefer him over Watson. Yeah.
I think if you're going to take Kyler Murray as your first quarterback in a startup, I think the one thing, like you're saying, you're going to correlate your team to, I'm not pushing all the chips in to make a bunch of win now moves. You mentioned it earlier, you're thinking 2-3 year window with your dynasty picks naturally. So that would be definitely the team where you're thinking, when Kyler's back to full health, 2024, 2025, who are the players that I'm going to have to build around as core assets? So and then that would reflect kind of maybe some of the different discussions we're going to have later about where certain older players are ranked tier wise. I guess I kind of have to agree with you in that Watson really didn't do much. And I believe I had him at QB 12, QB 13 in my rankings going into the season. I think I think once Lance broke his ankle, even though Watson wasn't playing at that point, that would have probably flipped him into the top 12 for me, and Lance at 13 where we have him now. And ultimately, I don't think he did much to raise himself. Dak didn't really do much to lower himself other than just get a year older. But at 27, I felt there's maybe less risk than, say, Tua and Kyler because of their injuries they suffered this year. I felt not that Watson jumped ahead of them, they more fell behind Watson to me. And that's kind of why I have them both ranked below Watson. And I'm still a little nervous about Tua, but now, we got news this week. They did clear the concussion protocol. Did find that timing a little interesting that, the Pro Bowl, because he wasn't eligible to make it to the Pro Bowl by their deadline in terms of when they had to get there. So they announced that he was still in the concussion protocol as a result of that. And that's why Tyler Huntley went. And then like a week later, okay, now I've cleared the protocol. I wonder, with everything that Tua has been through this year, was it more just like a kind of a little bit of a, NFL, because they changed the rule this year. If you don't show up at the Pro Bowl by choice, they kind of revoke that in your contract in terms of like the bonuses earned.
Oh yeah.
So if you've been elected to the Pro Bowl, you won't get the Pro Bowl status if you just choose not to go.
Okay.
I assume they're not allowed to do that if you're injured. So if Tua had any Pro Bowl stuff in his contract because he was still in concussion protocol and injured, I think he still would hit them and get them. If he's elected to a Pro Bowl, he gets this bonus. I think he's still eligible because he didn't play because injury. But he probably didn't want to go there because okay, I've been dealing with concussion. So now you've cleared. You're a week cleared. Now you still have to go to the Pro Bowl. You lose out on your money. So I wonder if that was maybe where that timing was about. But it was a little nervous, though, that it has lasted this long. So maybe in my mind, to kind of justify not being too nervous about Tua is to also kind of make that scenario up. But that's part of the reason why I'm just thinking, games next year, who's going to play more games? I'd imagine it's Tua over Kyler, and that's why Kyler, again, not so much that he's Watson or Tua. I mean, Tua had a great season last year, but we've also seen Kyler's upside. But I think there's so much risk with him, kind of like a Trey Lance where there's a lot of risk. And I'm still keeping Kyler at 12 for now, but that's especially with this Brock Purdy injury. And it kind of seems like Lance is more and more locked in to start week 1 for the 49ers, and there's maybe less risk there. Kind of considering him putting ahead of Murray, but for now, Murray remains at 12. Probably will stay that. If we get positive news through his recovery, probably will keep him there. I don't see him falling out of the top 12 right now, but that would maybe be there's temptation there, I'll say.
So speaking of Purdy, I was looking at your quarterback rankings, and I saw Purdy at 21 and Darnold at 22, and I said, "Hold the phone here. That is way too high." And I'm saying that's Purdy at 21, way too high before the injury, and Darnold at 22, way too high before the injury. For reference, if folks care, I have them at 36 and 35 respectively. So, what say you about Purdy and Darnold?
Yeah, I think with Purdy, it's the how well he played this year, just in terms of how many games they won, and like wasn't turning the ball all over a lot, like doing a lot of smart things, decision wise. I know Ruben Almada, at Superflex DGen on Twitter, he's got a podcast as well, Coast to Coast Dynasty podcast, and big 49ers fan, and he's watching a lot of stuff. And one of the tendencies that Garoppolo had there, unfortunately, was to take a lot of sacks, not throw the ball away as much. And it seems like Purdy, even though he's really young, and you'd expect the young kid to want to always make the play, apparently he's played it really smart, where not taking too many sacks, willing to throw the ball away, like a lot of good sort of mature quarterback tendencies to kind of make me think, with 3 years left on his rookie contract, I feel like, and my rankings kind of reflect, I think he's going to start games again at some point during this rookie contract. Now, with this injury, it kind of makes it seem starting games in 2023 will be less likely. And I still don't know exactly if he's had surgery yet, or I think they're still kind of trying to decide the nature of what his surgery is going to be. That might impact my rankings a little bit. I was kind of planning to, after the Super Bowl, maybe revise things. If we find out he gets Tommy John surgery and he's for sure out for all of 2023, and it might impact 2024, yeah, I think I'll definitely drop him pretty drastically in my rankings. Like kind of, I think you said 37 for you. That's probably appropriate there. If he's going to miss an entire season, potentially plus.
But yeah, for me, it was before the injury because like he's not good. Like he was being carried by his weapons around him in the defense. It was drag routes, it was dump offs, Purdy wasn't doing anything. Now he should be credited that he did improve on some of the flaws, like in his mechanics, that made him Mr. Irrelevant in the draft. But I just couldn't see. I was half jokingly saying to people that if he won the Super Bowl, I would still want Lance to be the day one starter. He's just much better prospect. So I think it's just a matter of like, do you believe in his ability to really be an NFL quarterback? But Darnold might have surprised me even more. Why Darnold at 22?
It seems like he kind of rebounded to play a lot better last year than we'd seen him. And yeah, he couldn't quite get enough wins to make the playoffs. But it seemed to me that I don't know. I felt like he kind of unlocked something where he wasn't taking a bunch of unnecessary risks. It seemed like he was playing smart, and to a certain extent, I mean, kind of relied on a really good run game, which is another thing that Purdy did that you didn't quite mention. You were talking about all the impressive passing weapons, but how strong of a run game to have in those scenarios to kind of help win games, but also kind of help keep the defense honest does certainly help. But it kind of, he played well enough to make me think he's probably going to get another shot. And right now, I suppose he's a free agent, so there is a chance no team decides to sign him, and he has to, or at least as a starter, and he has to go in as a backup. But as of right now, with as many quarterback vacancies as there are around the league, I kind of get the sense that Darnold's going to get a shot. And
yeah, I mean, quarterback's gross, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a shot. And I think everything you said about him sort of, playing not as bad at the end of the year is true. But I don't know that I can put him ahead of guys that you have him ahead of, like Geno, Derek Carr, Jimmy G, Stafford. I mean, like Stafford at 27, like
I'm pretty low on Stafford. I'm kind of almost done with him.
I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan, but I mean, the fact remains that like McVay's coming back, Kupp's coming back. Like, I mean, I'll throw him out there for a year or two on my dynasty roster before I trust Brock Purdy or Sam Darnold or even Aaron Rodgers, really. But you're the Packers fan, so maybe I shouldn't say that. What do you want to point out at running back?
So yeah, I think Well, it's interesting because what you pointed out is something I almost wanted to discuss. So we can kind of work our way down here. But I guess one of those players is Javonte Williams. And I suppose for among players, and I was kind of at first looking at, okay, the top 12 of our aggregate rankings and what were the biggest discrepancies within that top 12? Like where, and for a few positions, it was 8 spots difference. But I suppose anything greater than an 8-spot difference is probably dragging a player down enough to where they're not in the top 12 of the aggregate. So I suppose that I found it funny that, like, okay, at tight end, the biggest in the top 12, the biggest difference was 8 spots. Same at running back was exactly 8 spots. I think even at wide receiver might have been 2 in the top 12. But then I also thought, okay, yeah, anything more than that, it probably wouldn't equate to a top 12 player. But in this case, it's Javonte Williams. Yes, I think you have met RB.
I have 8, and you have him at 16.
16.
Yeah.
And I know one of the things you were questioning is, Cam Akers over a group of players, and one of them was specifically Javonte Williams. And I guess for me, the quick tale of why I'm so low all the way down at 16, because even not just with your rankings, I'm looking at the Fantasy Pros current Dynasty consensus, and Javonte is actually, the consensus is 8, so matching what you're saying. So it seems like I'm just kind of lower than everyone on Javonte, and I think it is the injury. And even looking at Breece Hall, I have him at 5, which seems pretty low for a Dynasty ranking of Breece Hall right now. But the guy's coming off the torn ACLs, and I suppose we talked about Kyler. It almost transitions nicely into this conversation, and just concerns for this season.
I will explain myself with that one, and it's simply that I was thinking the same that you were for a little while. I said, listen, Javonte, Breece, I kind of don't really want to touch them. But when I'm thinking about the idea of the short shelf life of running backs, their youth, their talent, the ability to bounce back from these injuries, they just aren't what they used to be. Now, multiple ligaments is a little different than if it's just the ACL, right? But and I just he's just very, very talented, and we're gonna get Sean Payton, in Denver. And listen, is the second year back from the ACL better than the first? Usually, yeah. Right. But again, I'm looking at this like what's my 2 to 3 year investment? Right now, this may also be something where maybe I grab Javonte, right? And it turns out after, the startup and all that, it looks like I'm not going in on 2023. And so, do I hold on to him and just use him in 2024 where I'm competing? Or do I say, hey, listen, he's probably a valuable asset because of the name, right? His value is going to go up when we start hearing that he's like rehabbing and coming back from the injury. I can flip him, So it's not always like what I want him to do for my team. It's what can I do with him in the trade market, and when I look at the type of guys that we have like in that range, for example, if I go to running back and look at where you're at, right? Like you've got him down at 16, and like I can't put Derrick Henry in front of him. I mean, Derrick Henry's the king, but he's also like 29, on a terrible team. You have him behind Ramondre. I don't know that as much as I'm like the Ramondre like hype train leader, like I don't know that I can do that, right? I just think he's way more dynamic. He's way more dynamic. The next name is
the one that really shocks you, right?
Yeah, well, not really shocks me, but like, there's Akers, there's Dobbins, again, guys that like I just think he's just really a lot better than. Plus, Dobbins, we'll see what happens, with Greg Roman gone, but it's not like they've been shy about having a lot of backs get snaps there. So I just can't see putting those guys ahead of him, really.
And I guess to your point, like to almost defend your point, I think I know like Cam Akers was the one that you kind of said, like even me having Cam Akers above Ramondre and Pollard and Williams, it seems to be where you wanted me to kind of explain my process. But I will say,
why don't we go there? I will call you out and say that you have Akers at RB13 ahead of Javonte Williams, Ramondre Stevenson, and Pollard. I have Akers at 20 or 21, I think. Yeah.
And I guess injury kind of factors in, and Dobbins and Akers last year, we kind of saw them, especially early in the season, really suffer because of their recovery from injuries. But now that they have kind of done that, got through the season, seems like they're kind of back to should expect healthy 2023. So I'm kind of banking on that. But I will say that the one thing that does factor in your favor with Javonte is the pass catching. Kind of, though, that's two things that Dobbins and Akers have kind of struggled to consistently get. Now, I guess the one thing with Akers is he's always had the other pass catching backs around, and now they've released Darrell Henderson, and like I look at right now, if you look at the Rams depth chart right now, basically his main backup is Kyron Williams, who basically is kind of like Akers, doesn't profile as a very voluminous pass catcher at all. So I expect the Rams probably will invest in running back. How significant is that? Is it someone that is going to come in as a pass catching specialist and take that away from Akers? Or is that a role he's going to gain this year? And I guess my ranking is maybe banking on or indicative of the fact that I kind of, and you said more talented. I guess I've been a little colder on Javonte, even from a film talent perspective as a college prospect. I've liked him. I thought he's good, but I don't necessarily view him as a better prospect, better talent than either Dobbins or Akers. And I think, all of them have kind of suffered significant injuries to take away from their, I think, ultimate potential. But yeah, I guess I'm just banking on the guys with the healthier seasons now coming back. Whereas, again, even with my ranking of Pollard below Derrick Henry is also okay with the injury he suffered in the playoffs. Like, does that affect his next season at all? It might not. He might actually be a guy that's able to come back for training camp. But I guess the one name I really struggled with was Ramondre Stevenson in terms of my rankings and putting him potentially ahead of guys like Dobbins and Akers. And right now I've got him at 14, but because I was on the Fantasy Coaches earlier this week, and that was a question that was posed is Ramondre Stevenson a top 12 dynasty running back? And I really hesitated on that and really struggled. So I think it could enter there. So I guess the Cam Akers to Stevenson debate could really be one that I'm looking to hear from, because I could consider, I guess, Ramondre ahead of those guys. I do like his talent maybe even more than all of them. So
I think the reason that I'm probably that low on Akers is a couple things. One, even before his injury, like he kind of flashed all in like a couple big games from what I remember, right? And even
he really struggled early in his rookie season.
Right.
He dealt with some injuries, but even then he wasn't getting on the field even when healthy as consistently as he wanted to.
Yeah, and as much as I said, I'll do a year or two of Stafford before some of these other jabronis. Like, at the same time, that offensive line, we don't really know. It was really bad this year, and that's the offensive line that Akers has right now. So until they address that, I don't know. Also, the not pass catching, and for me, excuse me. I have this tier of 14 to 19 of like Dobbins, Mixon, Pollard, Henry, Cook, Kamara, right? It's like a couple like of those aging guys towards the bottom of that tier. And it's like, can I put Akers ahead of those aging but productive guys yet, where he's up there with Dobbins and Pollard? I just can't yet, right? Once I think I can, he might leapfrog all of them. If I really like what I see, but maybe it's
because of that offense, right? Like, because he's tied to McVay, and you don't know who the Ravens OC is, and like even with Ramondre, it's tied to Bill O'Brien, and I think we like him as
and we were talking about this before the show. Some of it's residue, right? Like Akers, I've been bringing him up from 42 when he was demanding a trade, right? Like, and wasn't even and was a healthy scratch. You know what I mean? So like sometimes it's just, you bring a guy up and it's like, he's been coming up from so low that maybe he doesn't get to where he's at with somebody else, because you've been, you know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of like,
it's funny because July 2021, I think that's what happened. At the start of July, it was Cam Akers RB5 for me, and then he tears the Achilles, and I would have dropped him, I think, outside the top 30. Maybe not quite to 42, but it was probably 34, 35, somewhere in the mid 30s, I think, all the way down. So I was a big believer, and maybe, I maybe overreacted to the Achilles, but I certainly reacted strongly to that Achilles tear. And maybe, like you're saying, the residue though has kind of allowed me to bounce him up back higher and put him right now at RB12. Although, like I'm saying, I'm really strongly considering, or I guess 13. But strongly considering having Stevenson ahead of both of him and Dobbins. Right behind Swift is two good pass catching running backs. I guess one thing with Stevenson is he got both of the roles this year, goal line and receiving, to kind of, and that's what propelled him to a top 12 season. Do the Patriots give him both of those roles again? And like, it's always scary with the Patriots. I think it's that little bit of bias for that team, maybe. The hype score we talk about with players. There's certain teams that have a negative hype score. If this player's on this team, we like them a little less because of certain reasons. And Patriots running back might be a bit of a bias there. It's residue still. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's residue. I personally have him at 11, but I'll tell you this: if I don't think I'm competing in 23, he's the guy I'm moving.
And he might be one of the easiest running backs to sell right now when we're talking about this, like specifically this kind of tier of players. But even like, anyone kind of outside the top 5 at running back, he's probably one of the easier ones to sell because he's coming off such a great season. And the Patriots haven't done anything yet at running back. Everyone expects Damian Harris to be gone. So like, all the positive news right now regarding Stevenson, is as positive as it's going to get.
Yeah.
If the Patriots don't bring in anyone serious at running back, no one's kind of expecting it anyway. So everyone kind of continues. But if they do, can start to lose value. If they go in the draft, continue to lose value. So I love Stevenson too, but if I had enough shares, I might be looking to maybe sell right now. This is probably a bad time to sell a lot of running backs, but he may be one of the few.
Relative to that's true. I mean, I don't mean like,
because it's probably not a great time to sell Akers either.
It's not really a great time to buy running backs either.
Honestly, this is not a great time to buy any players really. Right. Like there's so much that can happen. Like, this is where you want as many picks as possible to liquidate as much. This is the worst time to buy, which means it's if no one wants to buy, it's also a bad time to sell because no one will want to pay up for the value. The picks are always more valuable than the players. So
and the reason I'm willing to move off of Ramondre too is one, it's running back, right? Two, as much as you said, Damian Harris might be gone, it's a deep free agent class and a deep rookie class, right? So right now, my RB11, right, could get a pass catching running back, either free agent or draft, enter his backfield, very easily because of how deep the class is in both free agency and rookies, and be knocked down a few notches anyway as we put Bijan and Gibbs and everybody else into the dynasty rankings, right?
Yeah.
So, that's also why I'm kind of willing to move off of Ramondre, because of that window. Speaking of residue, you wanted to call me out about a particular wide receiver.
Well, it's funny because let me take a look at this Fantasy Pros consensus ranking for full PPR. So I guess his expert consensus ranking right now on Fantasy Pros is wide receiver 6, and I've got him at wide receiver 5. And I kind of was, when I'm doing my rankings, was surprising that he was the one that really stood out to me as this. We'll get to talk about the tiers, but I kind of view him as again worthy of being in that top 5 because he produced really well through 2 years, and he still has the age. And he's kind of like, his production last year kind of dwarfed a lot of these guys that I know a couple of guys that you have ahead of him who are also young, still on rookie contracts. But my wide receiver 5 is Amon-Ra St. Brown. And again, I'm almost a little surprised to see him at wide receiver 6 in consensus. I kind of thought I was being really like almost not quite hot takey because I do believe it, but it shocked me a little bit that kind of as I went through and decided on him as the wide receiver 5. So I almost thought I would have to explain myself more, but it does seem like the consensus in the community really is buying into him after 2 seasons of what he's done. Even with the 4th round draft capital invested, man, why couldn't the Packers take him in the 3rd? It would A, give him better draft capital from a dynasty perspective, and B, I'd be happy because he's on the Packers, not on the Lions. But I don't know. I guess we'll talk about another receiver specifically that's on the Lions, but I still view Amon-Ra as the alpha of that team and still going to command the most targets every season. He's done it, and they kind of almost made TJ Hawkinson irrelevant to the point where they got a 2nd round pick for him, but felt worthy enough of not needing him, because I think that was a big concern for Amon-Ra. Okay, when you've got this tight end that could be one of the next George Kittle in terms of that athletic type of tight end that can just draw targets and create massive yardage as a downfield threat, and then Swift always taking targets, but it seems like through all of that, Amon-Ra has just continued to draw these targets, and maybe Jameson Williams eventually emerges to where he takes away from Amon-Ra. I think there is room though in the offense for them to both exist together and thrive.
Mhm.
And so I'm not, so concerned with Jameson Williams. I also don't really have him ranked highly, but even as, if I believe more in Jameson, and I will, rank him in the future higher, assuming he, produces better than he did last year, I don't think it's going to necessarily affect my ranking of Amon-Ra in a negative way. I think they can exist at different areas of the field, and Amon-Ra can still thrive.
Yeah. The reason I said this is a bit of residue is I've always been the low man on Amon-Ra, and I kind of bent the knee and said I was wrong. But I still don't believe that I'm as wrong as people think. I'm as wrong to get him to my wide receiver 13, right?
Still not a wide receiver 1 though.
I'm not wide receiver 5 with him. I just think it's way too high. Don't get me wrong. I was hammering Amon-Ra, when he was priced well in DFS this year. He's a target machine, right? And I get it. And in a PPR,
I'm sure even as a rookie, like in the rookie draft, he was going in the mid-second. Like you might have occasionally saw him like a 204, but like that was, that was a great time to buy him even through his rookie season.
Right. So now, but when I look at the guys I have ahead of him, right, I'm looking at guys that are just super talented, like either they're alpha as far as like size and production, or they're alpha as far as the true number ones on their team. They're just like elite wide receivers, right? And then I have a tier that starts with 12, and then he's 13. I just don't see him as that type of player, right? When I look at Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave or DK Metcalf, these are beasts. These are just absolute, just dynamic players. Amon-Ra is a very good player who gets a lot of targets and gets a lot and is good at yak per reception and targets per route run. And I get that. He's not a super talented, explosive, dynamic player, right? And when the more dynamic and explosive player in Jameson Williams, starts to eat into him a little bit more, not even so much surpass him, right? But eat into it enough, even though they're different parts of the field, right? Also, like, Goff isn't going to be there forever, right? And, Goff's a pretty low ADOT quarterback, and which, matches a pretty low ADOT wide receiver in Amon-Ra pretty well.
He's always loved the slot receivers. Like Amon-Ra kind of doubled as his version of Cooper Kupp.
Right. So what happens when, I don't know, they're, Goff is done as the bridge and they've got the next person, right? Like it's, I don't know that I like want to take Amon-Ra and invest in 2 or 3 years of him with, a guy like Jameson Williams on the team and his quarterback being Jared Goff, who's at like peak value right now. Like when I can have guys ahead of him like Metcalf, Olave, Wilson, Tyreek Hill, even an aging Diggs I have at wide receiver 11. Like, give me those guys for a couple of years before, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown has wide receiver 2 talent. He just happens to be producing at wide receiver 1 level.
And I guess to the Cooper Kupp comment of, I think of what happened to Cooper Kupp though once Goff left, and I think it's the risk of if they, if he leaves and they don't have a good quarterback, the entire offense might suffer. But then if they upgrade on Goff at quarterback, maybe does that quarterback actually unlock a further ceiling from Amon-Ra, kind of like Stafford has done with Cooper Kupp? Maybe a quarterback with a higher ADOT actually helps Amon-Ra. In that he could, from the slot, stretch the field over the middle more and maybe get better yardage efficiency because he's caught a lot of passage, I guess average amount of touchdowns for his receptions. But the yardage has not necessarily been the like a Justin Jefferson type of yardage on super high catches. So
I'll say 2 more quick things about Amon-Ra before I call you out at wide receiver. So 2 things. 1, I have a couple mental conditions, including being autistic, where part of my executive functioning is not good for fantasy football because it's essentially taking too long to come off your priors. It's having a single train of thinking and it being difficult to get off that line of thinking. So I will admit that might be a little bit with Amon-Ra too. It's sort of this natural stubbornness that I have. It's sort of a blind spot for me, and I try to calibrate for it. And and sometimes I just, it's I don't catch it.
Needing the clear evidence to say like this is definitive to why, as opposed to trying to predict it if evidence to the contrary before then has said this is where this player should be. You can predict a jump at times.
I'm slower to come off the prior sometimes than some other folks are, and I have to kind of like try to bake that in. But the other thing I'll say about Amon-Ra is that perceived value or trade value and things like that are part of my rankings. And if they are, I probably should have them higher than 13, right? Like, so I might adjust that after the show. Yeah.
I guess, because I think specifically who you have at 12 being his teammate, Jameson Williams, I don't see a lot of that happening where people are valuing him lesser than they would Jameson Williams. But
I think JMO's special. I see going into the draft, I had essentially a tier of 4 guys. Garrett Wilson toward the top of it, London towards the bottom of it, kind of JMO and Olave in the middle. And I kind of said, listen, these are all like it's really hard to differentiate between these 4 guys. They're basically wide receiver 1, all 4 of them. And then, when it came to like draft capital, landing spot, things like that, nothing too much really shook that up. I thought JMO,
all of them were top 12 picks.
Right. JMO, I think, is an explosive player who's going to be absolutely special. And I value him at the level that I value a Garrett Wilson or a Chris Olave right now. So it's hard for me to have him ranked too far below those guys. Right. But where I'm going to ask you about wide receiver, and I think this again speaks to like a philosophy thing. So we almost have like these groups like flipped on their head, right? Like, so I'm going to call you out for loving the old guys too much. You've got Tyreek Hill at 6, Diggs at 7, Devontae Adams at 8, and Cooper Kupp at 9. All of them ahead of Jalen Waddle, who I have at 5. Higgins, who I have at like 6 or 7. Wilson, I have at like 7 or 8. And Devonta Smith, who I have at like 12 or 13, or like 14, maybe right after Amon-Ra. So like I can't put that tier of guys ahead of those younger, dynamic players because they're already showing that they're producing and they're going to be highly valued and the highly valued assets, and they're ascending where the other guys are descending. So what's the reasoning behind having like those like 29-year-olds up top and then the younger guys below?
Yeah, the big tier of where, earlier mentioning like this is kind of where I wanted to center the discussion around is like, at what point do you go for the elite production? Because while they are descending, I think those were, if you look at points per game, those were 4 of the top 6 wide receivers in points per game this year is Hill, Diggs, Adams, and Kupp. And so like, while they are descending on your team for a team looking to win a championship, that could be really useful and helpful to have as like a wide receiver 1 anchor, and knowing that if you can't get Jefferson or Chase, who maybe the only 2 we could maybe assume could produce alongside them, maybe Amon-Ra eventually, as indicated by my wide receiver 5. But short of getting that, they become almost the scarce asset to get one of them. And I think the rankings, again, being tied to the draft, also have to be careful, right? Because if you were to follow my rankings, you would say, okay, I'll take Tyreek Hill and then come back around with Diggs. But in reality, what you should be doing is, okay, from that top tier of the really productive guys, who do you want to pick from there? And then come back around with this larger group of younger wide receivers. I think that tier for me goes from wide receiver 10, who is Jalen Waddle, all the way down to like maybe even Deebo Samuel at wide receiver 16. So a bit of a larger tier, almost twice as large, thinking I can double dip and get the give me the older productive receiver, whatever one I want to choose from here, and then knowing I can probably get a younger receiver back around. So this is one where the size of the tier may have also factored into why I went with the older older foursome here, we'll call them. Like the Golden Girls, I don't know, the Golden Guys.
Yeah, and it's because it's kind of playing out in startups too. Like as far as people are going both ways on this, right? So
I've often seen Waddle as like a wide receiver 4 or 5 off the board, and just startups that people show me, or so. Yeah. I think your ranking, even like the Fantasy Pros expert consensus, has Waddle at 5. So
So this is a couple weeks old, and Tom is gonna he's gonna get mad at me because I'm forgetting the guy to credit, but this guy keeps churning out like an aggregate average like startup location for startups that have the rookie picks thrown in, and it's like across platforms. And so this is a couple weeks old, but all our guys are mixed in, right? So Waddle 207, Amon-Ra 211, Tyreek Hill 212, Garrett Wilson 303, Higgins 306, back to Diggs 307, right? Chris Olave 401, back to your guy Kupp at 402, Metcalf at 403, Devonta Adams at 408. The community's divided on what to do with these guys too, right? By virtue of the fact that they're all mixed in this pot together of going in rounds 2 through 4 in the startup, right? Like, so it's a matter of picking your poison when it comes to that. So we can't even really use startup ADP as a barometer because it's pretty similar for a lot of these guys. I just think end of the startup, right? And people are now trading for need. Can I get more for Waddle than I can for Kupp? Probably, And I don't know that that's like the best way to look at it, but that's one way I look at it. Yeah.
Well, and again, that's the beauty of the rankings, right? It's however you stir the pot. Some go clockwise, other go counterclockwise. That might change the recipe a little bit, but everyone's got their own factor of how they're going to adjust the rankings. So it makes these discussions really interesting because we can both see the logic of how the other's approaching it. And I certainly understand why people are going Waddle at wide receiver 5. It's funny because anecdotally, I think this year Hill outscored Waddle. It would have been better to have Hill than it would have been to have Waddle. Shout out to our Going for Two founder. I love, again, check out goingfor2.com. You could find all our rankings there. I don't know, right now there's just the three of us, Brian, myself, and our founder, Jeff Lambert.
Founder hasn't even published yet. He's got him set, but he hasn't published yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My mistake. I thought I saw all three of them on there, but I expect more people will continue to populate those Dynasty rankings. We'll probably have about a half dozen different rankings on there.
Yeah.
Shortly after the Super Bowl, if not before. But anyway, I'm wearing the Going for Two hats. You can also buy that at goingfor2.com/store. Get all that good gear. But kudos to Jeff. He created the zombie style leagues last year, that format. And there's an article on goingfor2.com that explains them. And in the semifinals of the zombie league, I had Waddle was going up against Hill, and Waddle outscored Hill that week because he got the touchdown. Hill didn't. So this one time it was okay. Would have been better to have Waddle than Hill. And this one time it really mattered and helped me actually end up winning the league, beat Jeff in the final. So thanks Jeff for creating the league that I was able to win.
There you go.
But all to say, outside of that 1 week, I think I would have preferred to have Hill over Waddle most weeks. And so I think maybe kind of going with that bias of who do I want to have right now on my team? I'd rather draft Hill first, then Waddle. So I think that's maybe more than any player, Hill's real that kind of distinction is really what's driving, because they both end up being the top players in their respective tiers as a result of this. So it's almost a Hill versus Waddle debate, kind of in a microcosm a little bit, that they both kind of each are the top representative of these tiers, kind of going in and at it. But I can certainly see a few key players. Like I know you have Garrett Wilson, I think 7. So that's one of the bigger ones that in this range from, I guess we go say wide receiver 6 to 16. If Aaron Rodgers goes to the Jets, he might replace Amon-Ra as the wide receiver 5 for me in my rankings. Because that's an elite quarterback we know will hyper focus on whoever is his top target. And I think as good as I believe Elijah Moore's talent is, I think Garrett Wilson clearly showed he was coming in there and he's the alpha right away. Like there is. I don't know. It didn't take more than 1 year to almost immediately show Garrett Wilson was superior to Elijah Moore. So if Aaron Rodgers comes to the Jets and he's got this clear alpha target in Wilson, I think that's when, I'll for sure put him ahead of this older tier of guys. I guess I'm not quite ready to yet if it's a Zach Wilson, Mike White-led quarterback room. I guess that's maybe my hesitation with Wilson a little bit. And Olave.
That's fair.
Metcalf and it's funny because I Devontae Smith was another one that kind of surprised me. Like, wow, I actually have Devontae Smith as a wide receiver 1, but I mean, he's producing it. And even with AJ Brown coming, he's had a better season than he did as a rookie. So it's not like AJ Brown is stunting Smith's growth at all. So
yeah, I have this big tier of wide receivers for me that's like 16 to 25. And it's like I kind of don't know what to do with them, and that's maybe one reason why it's a big tier. Now, some of them it's kind of irrelevant because we've already said you already have them at like 8 or 9 or whatever. But like, and to get not that I love, but it's a good barometer where the community's at and where some of the people in your sleeper leagues are at, right? So I took a look there, and there's not a whole lot of answers there either. I have this like huge leaving out the old guys that you love, like Treylon Burks, Michael Pittman, Godwin, Pickens, Marquise Brown, Drake London, DJ Moore, Jahan Dotson, kind of Christian
18
Watson.
to 28 for me.
Yeah,
is that basically
like,
that tier? I've actually Godwin at 17, so I could say 17 to 28.
I could see a league where like Pittman would be the most valuable in that league and that micro market, and I could see a league where
Judy
Pickens
now
or
is
London.
Going there. I know I've raised Judy up. I think he's at 18 for me, kind of raising to the top of that.
Yeah, with Peyton coming with I mean, I could see that. Yeah, sure. It's like it's kind of like if you I would say kind of test that out and see in your league. Like you might have Pickens, but the person who has Hollywood might like Pickens better. Give it a shot, right? Pittman, is a guy who we have, questions about who the quarterback's going to be, who the coach is going to be, but still has some value. People had him at like top 12 for a while. I don't know. See what you can get for like, is there somebody who would give you, maybe you don't like Dotson, so I won't use that example, but like,
well, the other rookie, Christian Watson, for instance,
Watson,
Packers bias too, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to call me out at tight end.
Well, it's funny because talk about Jerry Jeudy, and I to me right now he's the one I've raised the most of the Broncos with the Sean Payton news. So I think he gets the biggest bump, and maybe I'm a little slightly colder on say a Greg Dulcich, which I guess actually that's you calling me out on being low on Dulcich, but that's another giant tier. I think tight end 6 I've got Dallas Goedert. I think that's a clear delineator. Like I'd much rather have Goddard than anyone below him. Obviously, that's why he's ranked there. But I think like as a tier break after Goddard, and then to me, I've got Evan Ingram as that next guy at tight end 7. I noticed you have him all the way down at 15.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is almost it's funny because I think a lot of times you're looking at your season end rankings. The difference between tight end 7 and 15 is usually so minimal. So I'm not even sure if this discussion matters that much. But I guess the one thing for me with Ingram, there's a bit of risk. I think right now the risk is that he leaves Jacksonville because it might be one of the best spots for him to be on, where he gets a good efficient quarterback, but without whether it's Ridley or Kirk, it's not an alpha that's going to, you have to give me 180 targets. Like there's no one that's going to draw so much away to the point where there's games where Evan Ingram might be the most targeted Jaguar. Like he's on a team. It's tough to find that for a tight end where you could be the most targeted player, maybe not over the course of a season, but over the course of a game and still have a really highly efficient quarterback.
Yeah. So I had him at 11 or 12 up until a few days ago. So the difference wouldn't have been that much. Yeah. It's when I learned about like their contract and cap situation where I was like, it's a good chance he might be gone. They are they have the fifth worst cap situation right now at like negative 22.3 million or something like that. Right.
And they already like, especially their pass catchers are some of the highest paid in the league. Like that's where they've already got a big chunk invested already among pass catchers. So I kind of baked in the likelihood that he's going to leave Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence. And I noticed you've got him kind of in a range where there's a few free agent tight ends. I think I know I've got Gesicki at 15. I think you had him kind of right around there, 15, 16, which is a little higher than consensus. And I think it's
because
almost the opposite end of that same spectrum.
Yeah. He'll go somewhere that'll use him right. And I think he's a good guy.
Maybe Jacksonville if they don't want to, if Ingram's too expensive, right? So suddenly I'd probably prefer Gesicki over Ingram. But I will say like Ingram has kind of showed it really right from as a rookie. Like he was one of the few tight ends that really had a strong rookie season. And has kind of floundered, but now has finally kind of found that again. And it seems like his athletic profile from a tight end is probably, I'd trust in that more than, again, anyone below this. So that's why right now even with the risk of him potentially leaving Jacksonville, it's nullified by my belief in his talent. And so that's why he ends up at 7. I guess it's funny. That's his same draft classmate, David Njoku. We both have a tight end 8. So we can kind of agree on Njoku. And I think a lot of the reasons I like Njoku are a lot of the similar reasons to Ingram. So as much as, like I say, I noticed you have Freiermuth even ahead of George Kittle, for instance. I noticed like Kittle was a little lower, like tight end 7. Like I've got him at tight end 3. And while it's only 4 spots, it's also in that tier again, like the difference making tier. So that was a bit of a shocking one. I
think that goes back to your philosophy and approach with age, right? Like, your top tight end is, I mean, you go Kelsey, Hawk, Kittle, Andrews, Pitts, Goddard
probably
right?
6.
Yeah. And I go Pitts, Andrews, Kelsey, Hawk, Goddard, Freiermuth, Kittle.
Top 5.
Yeah. So,
I will say tight end's probably the one position I care about age the least.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that's baked in there. But like, when I'm but that,
if Lamar Jackson goes to the Falcons, I'll raise Pitts above 5. Like I'll say that. Like that's probably a shocking one for a lot of people.
To me, like not caring about age at tight end is why I allow Kelsey to be 3, not why I put him 1. You know what I mean? Like, at any other position, I'm not putting him at 3. You know what I mean? That's kind of the way I look at it. But so I will call you out at tight end, and then we'll each do our bonus. So Komet, I have at 13. You have him as well, but you have Gerald Everett at 12, ahead of Greg Dulcich at 14. I have Everett at 17 and Dulcich at 9. What say you about being high on Gerald Everett?
Well, and it's funny. It's similar to your Jaguars argument. The Chargers is they've, what are they going to do at the receiver position? I mean, yeah, they've got Mike Williams and Keenan Allen there, but they also, I feel like, even though they've got the rookie quarterback, they also have a lot invested there already. So I could see that being kind of almost a team that runs it back with their current receiving core. And year 2 with Herbert, I wonder if Everett takes a step up, better connection. New offensive coordinator too. So we'll see what kind of effect that has on the tight end position. Kellen Mond, right? Or Kellen Moore, not Kellen Mond. I mean, Kellen Mond might be better served to just go to coaching.
I was going to say at this point, he better try to be an OC, right? Because
So we'll see what Kellen Moore effect. We saw how often the tight end was used in the offense this year with Dalton Schultz. So I'm excited for again another good athlete as a tight end in Gerald Everett. I guess, with the Sean Payton getting there, I guess I've raised Judy so much that I haven't necessarily. He's the one that I feel like will have the biggest effect in them. So I'm not necessarily raising everyone else higher. I've kind of kept Dulcich kind of around this spot through the process. So
and I mean, I had Dulcich at 9 like before Payton came, so it's almost like double counting for me to pull him up. So I didn't really adjust after that. So for me with Everett, I know tight end, like age matters less for tight end, but he is going to be 29 in June, right? And so for me, he's right. I have a tier of 11 through 16 where it's Waller, Schultz, who I think is also a guy who if he's not back with Dak, like oof, right?
For sure. I've got him 11 too, but he's definitely someone who I could see for Schultz specifically could fall in my rankings if he leaves Dallas. Again, one of these Mike Gesicki's or Evan Ingram goes to Dallas and suddenly changes the perception.
So I have Waller, Schultz, Komet, Gesicki, Ingram, and then Knox ends that tier. And then Everett starts a tier with a bunch of the 2022 rookies mostly in that tier. Whereas like they're producing, and that turned out to be a better tight end class than we thought. But there's still reasons to maybe not really push them up higher than where I have them. And he's kind of like mixed. He's at the top of that tier, and then it's like a bunch of the 2022 rookies. So I have him at 17 because to me he's like right below. I'll put in 2 or 3 years with a Knox or a Gesicki or an Ingram before I put in 2 or 3. Well, Ingram's higher for you, but before I put in 2 or 3 years with Gerald Everett. But I mean, he is tied to Herbert, so I mean there is, and probably the offense, but it's not really like the offense was it really that big of a problem in LA with the Chargers this year? I mean, like they had injured weapons early in the year, but it seemed to me that the fact that they were a complete run funnel defense, like it was the problem. No.
Well, I think there were definitely you can't say the defense didn't have its problems, but it seems like you're complaining about Goff, the low ADOT. It seems like that was Herbert this year, high volume but a lot of low passing, almost like Tom Brady with the Buccaneers. So was I think an offense that designed to take advantage of Herbert's strong arm maybe more needed. Was that the OC relying so heavily on Eckler as a receiver and tons of dump offs as kind of almost like a first read? Just Kellen Moore bring an offense that will make more first read players as downfield threats and allow Herbert to kind of push the ball down the field still quickly and kind of set the plays up that way, which I think would help a tight end like Everett, who's a bit more athletic, can kind of stretch the middle of the field as a tight end. So I kind of like the OC is a bit of a boost for him too, compared to maybe Dulcich, who I think the way Peyton designs routes, like whoever's the slot receiver is going to get so much that volume, I think. And I guess the one concern with Dulcich is what does Albert Okwebunon's role fit on the team? Are they playing a bunch of two tight end sets and they can both thrive? Or is it something where they're each taking away from each other's playing time?
I mean, he's probably salvageable. He had a couple good plays there at the end of the year. But when you say slot, it's like, well, I mean, Dulcich was playing big slot so much this year, even with, the wide receivers healthy. Like his route participation was in like the high 80s with Russ. So I don't know that I'm all that afraid of, of like him eating comparative to Judy, but I don't know. Yeah. So your bonus brings us back to the running back position.
It's funny because we want to talk about Denver a little bit with Javonte Williams there, and dating back to their rookie class, I always thought Najee Harris was the RB1 for me. I thought I liked it better than I did Williams, and even through now, especially with Williams coming off the torn, having the torn ACL, like I'd rather have Harris. So I've got him at RB6. You've got him at 12. Not quite. The Javonte disparity is a little more extreme, but I've got him kind of in a range similar to where you have Javonte. So that kind of that next tier of younger running backs, I like him more than a Josh Jacobs or a Nick Chubb, as much as I love the talent of Nick Chubb. Give me that guy who's still on his rookie contract. So in this case, it's Najee. Yeah.
I have him one notch above Nick Chubb. So I have him in a tier. I have him in a tier of 7 to 13, and Harris is 12, and Chubb is 13. So the 12 on Harris, that is the bounce back ranking, because he's always been a guy who is low efficiency and needs hella volume, right? And when you're getting sometimes neither, as he was, and we weren't sure how much the foot was affecting him, and we saw the offensive line not really gelling. I had him down at like I think 16 or 17 at one point, right?
Yeah, I remember my weekly rankings. He would be sometimes even outside the top 20 at times in bad matchups.
Right. So for me, this is the bounce back. This is a guy who came in as an older rookie. It relies on a lot of volume with low efficiency. And so it's kind of like a slightly younger, not that they're the same player, but a slightly younger Joe Mixon in that regard, like lots of volume, low efficiency. And so I don't really love him all that much. And I think kind of, when he's like the RB 1 or 2 in a draft class and gets a great landing spot, so to speak, with the Steelers, I think we got a little over our skis with him. And
I was talking about him and maybe being the RB2 last year at some points the offseason. So the Cam Akers have definitely hyped it up a little much. So I definitely would have dropped him. And I guess because my initial ranking was so high, the bounce back ends up being high as well, kind of like the Cam Akers. So it comes back to that same philosophy again. So at least we're consistent, right? The one last thing I'll say about Harris is I do think that foot injury did impact him. A Liz Frank. I mean, you hear Liz Frank, it's usually pretty serious. And it seemed to be a lower grade strain because he didn't actually miss any time with it. But it seemed like even just the 1 week rest of the bye week seemed to change things for him. If you take his points per game after the bye week and compare to the rest of the league, he's back half RB1. as opposed to where he finished
yeah.
as like a middling RB2.
What worried me at one point with him is he was telling somebody like, "Oh, there's been this plate in my foot to like in
the shoe, right?
Or whatever, right? Yeah, you know, and we're taking it out now." And then after that, he still had 2 or 3 weeks of like nothing, and I was like, "Ooh."
His first week after the bye week was like right around like 9 points, 10 points, but then I think then after that he started getting the big games, and there was a bit of a touchdown stretch right after that. But I guess that finishing stretch kind of that's what I'm going to buy in as more as the real Najee. But to be fair, I mean, like I said, you've him at RB12. That isn't really so low, but it was more just me wanting to talk up Najee. So I chose that as the bonus in the 5th one.
Right on. And for me, we've already talked about JMO and how much I love him. I guess for me, it's how is he 32 and Dotson 47? You know, behind guys that like I just can't see them being behind. It's not so much like you don't have to have JMO at 12. I get that, but 32. What's up with that?
Yeah, I didn't think that was that extreme. The consensus right now is 24. So it's funny. We're both so extreme on it that it ends up being kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
I guess I was thinking like, you know, where like I've got Pickens at 30. I thought I even had him a little higher. I have Pickens at 34. And kind of if I were to map out where I'd, you know, rehash the rookie wide receivers, he ends up between Christian Watson and Pickens for me in terms of if I were to redraft. And maybe, you know, considering the draft capital, maybe that is kind of premature to put Watson ahead of him. But I've got Watson at 29 and Pickens at 34. So James to be kind of just entered in that, you know, 32 right in that middle ground. Now, maybe I'm not bullish enough on him, and he really does belong at least in the top 30 ahead of Watson, which that would put him at 29 if I were to kind of like switch them around or at least put him directly ahead. But yeah, I guess he just hasn't shown me enough yet. Not his fault, again, coming off the serious injury. Never really expected year one to be a great year for Jameson Williams. And maybe I don't have any dynasty shares of him because I kind of expected that was not an asset I'd want to have in 2022, but certainly would be more willing to buy into him now. But not going to buy him off Brian, but Brian's probably not selling Jameson Williams. It's certainly not the price he's going right now.
No, I got him at the 601 in a startup, and like my pants got tight. Like JMO at the 601. Oh, baby, this is good. You know, and I can get that. I think this is kind of a punt for him this year, right? And I think if he was producing, you know, even, you know, I don't know, 75% of what Olave and Wilson were producing, you know, like 70% of that. What would we think of him?
Yeah, I might have him more with Drake London and Burks in kind of the mid-20s. Yeah,
but also I guess
early
I think
20s.
for me it's like I can't see having Juju, Mike Williams, and Amari Cooper and ahead of him, and
probably Christian Kirk too, who's another one.
Christian Kirk, yeah, but like Terry McLaurin 13 spots ahead of him. Like I can't see it. I don't know.
I guess I feel like the last couple of years I've been a lot higher on Juju than consensus. That's one where I'm intrigued to where he goes in free agency. That's one where he could really catapult that ranking up or down. The one I might even you're probably right. 47 might be a little low for Dotson. Kind of looking now, there is a group. It's the tiers. I guess I put him behind this tier of a lot of older guys: Hopkins, Lockett, Allen, Evans. I suppose first round capital at wide receiver.
Tyler Boyd, Kyle, you have Tyler Boyd ahead of Jim.
My most rostered player in 2022, Tyler Boyd. I love Tyler Boyd. That one I will forever be too high on consensus over Tyler Boyd.
Keenan Allen.
I'm looking. I've got Kadarius Toney at 38, and they're both first round guys, maybe unexpectedly first round guys. That's probably a fair comparison. So
except Jahan Dotson's good.
Well, I actually like Toney a bit better, but I could maybe justify raising Dotson to be right behind Toney and put him at, I guess, would be 39, which would make you a little happier, but probably like
Tell
you're
you
saying,
what,
you've got him at
I'll bump
25.
up.
So.
I'll bump up Amon-Ra a couple spots if you bump up Dotson a couple spots, and
Which I think is fair. I
we'll
did enjoy
sign a
doing this
peace agreement
exercise because it did kind of open my eyes to a few of these guys. Of maybe I'm being too harsh on, or too. I guess in the case of Brock Purdy and Darnold, maybe too aggressive on. So yeah, there's definitely a few that I can consider. I mean, you've probably sold me honestly on Ramondre, moving him up at least into the top 12, and yeah, I'll probably raise Dotson. So at least you've convinced me on those two.
Yeah, I think I'd say I'd at least flip flop JMO and Amon-Ra based on this. I have them 12 and 13. I'll at least flip flop them.
So Amon-Ra is finally a wide receiver one until there's a rookie that comes in and right to the first round.
But really, I mean, top 12 dynasty isn't necessarily a wide receiver one. Like wide receiver one is like what they finish in fantasy or what they are on your roster. Like I don't really even think of that as like a big number, like a 12 when it comes to like my dynasty ranking.
And really, like again, the difference is probably in the top 6, and then 7 through 15, 16 is probably not that much different anyway. So 12 to 13 it's a like magical line of they're suddenly producing all these more points for you.
Yeah, I think I will also I will reflect and contemplate and ruminate and meditate on Cam Akers a little bit. That maybe I'm just been too slow to bring him back up, and why not put him ahead of Cook and Kamara? So all right. I guess it's about time to land the plane. Please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review on the Going for Two audio, Going for Two live audio podcast feed. If you're watching us here on YouTube, pretty much the same, right? Subscribe, like, comment, notifications, bell, ding, ding, ding. Time for plugs. Kyle, where can we find you and your work one more time?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Senra Says. As mentioned, apart from Going for Two, I do a couple of podcasts with Full Press Coverage, and I do run one of those accounts. You can also actually a couple of those accounts. So you can follow us on Twitter at FPC_FantasyPod. Follow the Full Press Fantasy Pod, and we'll return next week for a Super Bowl preview. Also follow the Full Press Packers pod account at FPC_Packers. We just recorded our Super Bowl preview this week, so you can check that out with Full Press Chiefs managing editor Braden Holochek. Such a great football guy. I've always loved talking to Braden, and he had a lot of good insight. We had a good conversation just about this Chiefs-Eagles game coming up. And, of course, check me out on the Going for Two Live network. Again, every Thursday, or it would be every second Thursday now, on the Dynasty Gambit. So our next episode will be next Thursday, February 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then starting February 20th and every second week after that on Press Coverage, via the season 3 of Press Coverage here. A little bit of a twist, some specific guests coming. I won't spoil it too much. It's been one-on-one interviews with different people in the fantasy industry, but there's a specific theme for the guests I want this year, and change the questions a little bit this year to reflect that. So join the special surprise from this year. I did kind of just today confirm who my first guest is going to be, and it's I don't know if I'll spoil that surprise yet, but it's a former Going for Two live member. If anyone remembers the Devi Royale, which was part of the Going for Two live.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I've if you've been watching Press Coverage enough, I think I've had the other two on already. So if you narrow by process of elimination, you'll know who my guest is for this one.
Well, I love all three of them.
For sure.
So yeah,
Christian and Kevin are all great, but. I guess I had Christian on last year on Press Coverage, so it's not him. But you can definitely check again. All the video archives are still there on the Going for Two Live YouTube page from all our shows last year. So that's the one thing about these Press Coverage shows is that they are pretty evergreen because talking about the people, talking to the people about themselves and things they like and their history going up through football. So go back and check out several episodes, including the episode I had with Christian Williams. But definitely get one of those Devi Royale guys back on February 20th. So check out everywhere I am on Going for Two Live Network and goingfor2.com for stuff like Dynasty rankings. And eventually when the CFL season starts, I'll do my CFL DFS articles as I do every year. I'm sure I'll try and get some other articles in between for Jeff. But that's me, Kyle Senra. So thanks a lot, Brian, for having me on.
Right on. All right. You can find me at Twitter at ffjunkie_. Dynasty rankings and some articles up on Going for Two We're going to be putting rookie rankings up there soon too. Speaking of, I just did a prospect profile on Izzy Abanikanda. My next one coming out is a name that's been on a lot of people's lips lately, but I liked him before it was cool, Tyjae Spears. So keep an eye out for that. On Wednesday nights, I record an audio-only podcast called Dynasty Fever, and the episode dropped on Thursdays. That's with Jesse Schneeman from the Dynasty Warzone family of products, if you will. And we'll be having Matt Hicks from Rookie Big Board on this upcoming week. So we'll be recording Wednesday and dropping on Thursday, February 9th, my birthday. And so make sure you check out the entire Going for Two family of content. We got a lot of podcasts, a lot of live shows, even into the off season, as we've been saying, pretty much every night of the week. Obviously, the website. And when you're on the website, in the little bottom right, there's a little purple Discord thing. Click on that. Join the free Discord community. It's on and popping. Lots of conversations in the channels. Me telling people why they're wrong about rookie prospects, and all sorts of fun stuff. And then Tom and Jeff going at it as well. All right. So again, Kyle, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy life to fill in for Josh. And we'll be back. We'll be back next week with a Dynasty Saturday Night 5. So that's a wrap. Thanks for being with us.